welcome to Story Time. We are currently reading Nan and Sidekick Grandad by Annaliese Matheron. Annaliese is a local author and she has kindly said that we can read her story for our Storytime sessions. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Quite exciting trying to find out or work out what's going on with Nan and Grandad and Mrs. Gillespie. So get yourselves comfortable, sit down, and we will have chapter 5. This is called Cake. Ben was told he had to spend the evening in his room. The neighbourhood watch meeting is no place for little boys. Besides, us fogies would just bore you, Nan said. That suited Ben. He had some serious thinking to do and maybe a bit of snooping around as well. He sat in the pink powder puff of a room, looking over his notes and writing down everything that had happened since he'd arrived, from first seeing Mrs. Gillespie to the secret panel in the shed. He had a feeling it was all connected somehow. The doorbell rang. Ben leapt onto the bed, scattering frilly cushions onto the floor. It was Mr. and Mrs. Chang. He jumped down and reached for his binoculars. He found old Ted on the floor next to all the cushions. "So what do you make of it all?" he asked him. Ted looked straight back at him. He was obviously as stumped as Ben was. Ben sat Ted on the windowsill and then used his binoculars to pan up and down the grove. All was quiet, trees blowing in the soft evening breeze, a cat strolling along a fence, a twitch of Mr. Gregson's curtains. Then he saw Uncle Cedric come out of his house and make his way across the road to Nan's. Uncle Cedric wasn't a proper uncle. He was just one of those family friends everyone called uncle, but Ben liked him. He knew lots about aeroplanes on account of having flown one in the war, and he always had interesting stories to tell. Ben heard the door close again as Uncle Cedric came in. Next came the Miss Cleggs, 2 spinster sisters who lived together at the end of the grove. They were always chatting to each other like a pair of clucking hens. Ben thought they used a bit too much makeup and definitely too much perfume for his liking. But they made excellent cakes and he could see they were carrying one. He focused the binoculars on the cake. It was chocolate, with frosting and chocolate shavings on top. Ben's mouth started to water. He was so preoccupied with the cake that he almost missed seeing Colonel Brown cross the road and enter the house at the same time. Ben's stomach gave a rumble. The rabbit stew he'd had for dinner just hadn't hit the mark. He'd left most of it out of respect for his own poor rabbit. He hoped it would never find out about his carnivorous escapades. Ben thought he could smell the chocolate cake downstairs. It was calling to him. "Ben, come and eat me." Just then the sound of the motorised scooter hit like a thunderbolt to his senses. If he wanted cake, he'd have to go now. Ben jumped off the bed and ran straight to the door. "Nan!" he called from the stair. Milliseconds passed by in absolute silence. "Nan!" he called again, a little louder. "What do you want, Ben?" she snapped. It was time for some extra sweet manners. "I saw the Miss Cleggs come in, and I haven't seen them at all since I arrived here. I thought it might be quite impolite for me not to say how do you do," said Ben, then adding to himself, "and sample some of their delicious cake." Nan could do nothing but agree to let Ben say hello. Ben ran downstairs, jumping over the last one and skidding round into the kitchen. He quickly said his hellos to everyone, paying particular attention to the Miss Cleggs. "I think you've had your hair done since I last saw you. It's very nice," he said to one. "And is that a new blouse? It really brings out the colour in your eyes," he said to the other. The flattery worked a treat, and before Ben knew it, he was being asked if he wanted a piece of cake. "As long as you don't mind, Nan," Ben added, picking up the cake knife. "Go ahead, Ben," Nan said. "He's such a lovely boy," Ben heard one of the Miss Cleggs say as he slapped a wedge of cake on his plate. Grandad had come to get some cake too. He gave Ben a knowing wink. Ben's cheeks flushed and he quickly stuffed a massive fork full of cake into his mouth. It was the best chocolate cake he had ever tasted, rich and creamy, not too bitter, just sweet enough. Ben was savouring the mouthful until he looked down and saw that Grandad was eating a different cake, a fruit cake which had been covered by a red checked cloth. Ben almost choked. He coughed, sending small pieces of minced-up chocolate cake flying in all directions. Suddenly, things clicked into place. The notebook and Mrs. Gillespie sprang to mind. Note, the old bat had some kind of parcel wrapped in a red checked cloth. Rat poison. And Nan chuckling, I don't want to poison anyone. What had the old bat said? The words came echoing back. That should get rid of them all. Ben grabbed the plate from Grandad. Don't eat it, he yelled. Grandad was startled. Ben, what's going on? He asked. It's poisoned. The cake. Mrs. Gillespie's poisoned the cake. What are you talking about, boy? Said Colonel Brown, his voice booming from across the room. I made this cake this afternoon from my old dear Ma's recipe, Lord rest her soul. Just then the doorbell rang. No, you didn't, said Ben. Colonel Brown tightened his gaze on Ben, his moustache twitching. Then she entered the room. Mrs. Gillespie was definitely a sight in her scooter. But out of it she was terrifying. The crusty old octogenarian stood hunched in the doorway, resting on two knobbly walking sticks. Her swollen legs, which resembled blue cheese, shook with exertion. What mischief you spreading now, boy? She squeaked, spittle issuing forth. You poisoned the cake, Ben blurted. Mrs. Gillespie caught Ben in her icy stare. He felt as if she had knocked all the breath out of him. Liar, she squeaked. Ben clutched the plates. His knuckles went white. But I saw you. I saw you give this cake to Colonel Brown, and when you returned the rat poison, you said you'd get rid of them all. Mrs. Gillespie didn't move. Her eyes just bored deeper into Ben's skull. Ben, apologise to Mrs. Gillespie and Colonel Brown immediately, said Nan. What for? Telling the truth? She did make this cake, and she poisoned it. Ben was shaking now. The boy's quite right on one account, said Colonel Brown in his clear, stern voice. Mrs. Gillespie did make the cake. An audible gasp came from the Miss Cleggs, who'd been having a grand evening thus far, watching the argument play out as if it were a game of tennis. It's true, I'm no cook, never have been, and for the past 6.5 years Mrs. Gillespie has made my old Ma's fruitcake for me, and I've been passing it off as my own. Colonel Brown hung his head. Can you forgive my deceit? He asked. All the old folks seemed in shock. In fact, they were more disturbed by this cake fake than they were by the fact they might have eaten poison. Don't worry, Colonel. All is forgiven and forgotten, Mrs. Chang said solemnly. Have you all lost your marbles? Ben shouted. She tried to kill you. All eyes were now back on Ben. Mrs. Gillespie began to shuffle towards him. Ben froze as the old hag inched her way forward. Resting one bony hand on both canes, she reached out and took Grandad's plate, lifting it to her face, and began to eat the cake off it like a dog. When she had finished, the rotten old witch licked the plate and handed it back to Ben. Ben felt sick to the bottom of his stomach. Nan snatched Ben's chocolate cake for him in one swift move, grabbed his ear between her thumb and forefinger, and pulled him up the stairs to bed. I am mad with you, Ben, so mad that I just don't have the words to begin to tell you. And with that, Nan slammed the door, leaving Ben to his thoughts. Ooh, this story's getting more and more interesting. There's more intrigue here. So come back tomorrow where we will find out what's going on. I don't know. Ninja Nan and Sidekick Grandad by Annaliese Matheron. So I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock for more of this story. Bye-bye.